Welcome to Slaying Excel Dragons video number 52. Hey, these are the videos that accompany the book. And this video is about a chapter that isn't even in the book. We're going to talk about recorded macros, a bunch of things right here. Let's go over to our Excel workbook. We're in the excelisfun Start workbook. You can download this by clicking on the link below the video or get it from the DVD. Now, there's no chapter in the book about recorded macros. There's a list of the topics we're going to cover here. There's a few notes right here. Now, I just got to give you a caveat. There's this whole world behind the scenes in Excel called VBA code, and that's where the real power is. And I'm just not that good with VBA code. But I do know how to hack the macro recorder a little bit. So we'll just see how to use a macro recorder. Now, a macro recorder is simply like a tape recorder. If I highlight some cells in Control B and then click over here and add a color or create formulas or whatever, if I have the macro recorder turned on, it's following me around. But instead of recording exactly what I'm doing, it's creating code. And if I run that code, it will do the exact same thing that I was doing, like adding bold, selecting cells, adding fill color. I'm going to Control Z. So macro recorders are good when you have repetitive tasks that you do all the time, like formatting the same report every month. Now, macro recorders are for those of us that don't know how to hand write VBA code. Now, we got to do a bunch of things. There's some notes here, there's some notes here, and then there's this M1 as sheet is our first sheet we'll do a macro on. We have to do a couple things first. First, the developer ribbon, if it's not showing in 2007, you have to go to the orb. There's a little orb up here and down to options. And then on the very first tab, you have to click the developer ribbon. In 2010, you have to right-click any ribbon and say customize ribbon right here. There it is over here. And over here, you have to show the developer ribbon by clicking it. All right, that's important in 2007 and 10. Also, there's new file extensions. .xls, if I hit the F12 key, which is save as, right here, this is the file extension we used to use before, .xls, and that allowed macros or not macros. In 2007 and 10, .xlsx, you're not allowed macros or VBA code. .xlsm, you're allowed VBA or recorded macros. Remember, recorded macros just create the VBA for us. All right. So you got to show the developer ribbon, and you got to use the right file extension. Now let's look at the developer ribbon. Now we want to look up here at the code group. There's the record macro button. This is the relative reference button, and here's one of the big tricks with recording macros. This governs movement in the macro, meaning whether you select on cell C2 absolutely or 2 cells above. And we'll see how to use that. Macro, that's the list of macros, and we'll use the keyboard shortcut Alt F8. This opens up the Visual Basic Editor, which is where the code is. And this is macro security. Let's take a look at this. I'm going to click on this. You can decide what macro setting. This is not recommended, and I have it set. Disable all macros except digitally signed. No, disable all macros with notification. That's probably the one you want. And that way, when you open up your workbook, you'll get a message that says there's macros in this. So disable. I'm going to keep mine down here. I'm going to click OK. Now I want to go look at the Visual Basic Editor. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Alt F11. Alt F11. Over here on the left is the VBA project. It's kind of like a Windows Explorer, except for, whoa, that's our workbook. And these are all the sheets. What a gigantic workbook this is. VBA project, there's our workbook. There's the objects. I'm going to scroll down here all the way down to the bottom. And right below here, here's some other things that I have. The personal workbook is where you store macros that are going to be used universally. If you're going to store them in your workbook, they work only in this workbook. And later when we insert a module, our module will show up down here. Now I'm going to scroll up. Now, if you ever were to go to the internet and search Google, or you get code from the Mr. Excel message board, you don't know how to write code yourself, but someone gives you some incredible code that does just what you want, all you got to do is go to Insert Module. Now, when we record our macro, it will do this for us. There's a module over here, and down at the bottom it says Module 1. All you'd have to do is then paste over here, and boom, whatever the name of this code would be, it would show up in your list of macros. Now, we have one module 1 with nothing there. We're going to do some recorded ones, and they'll show up down here. All right, let's go ahead and close this VBA Editor. And now we looked at this. We have the file extension. We want to go and try and record our first macro. I'm going to go over to M1. Now, in this workbook, it says M1, M1.1, M1.2. These are all for you to practice. We're going to record our macro here, and then we're going to see if it works here. And then there's some extra sheets. If you're practicing, you might want to copy them over. Right-click, copy, move or copy a bunch of times and get some extra ones. Because when you're learning how to do macros, recorded macros the first time, it could be pretty frustrating. It's macro recorder doesn't always do what you want. All right, here's our situation on sheet M1. We have this report, and if I scroll down, it's always exactly 21 rows. It's got this data, and we want to format this and add a column with a formula. No problem. However, for this first macro, we're going to record what's called an absolute. We're not going to click this button to change it to relative. And what absolute means is when you turn the recorder on and you click in this cell, in the macro recorder, it says, I just clicked in E2. Right? Click over here, I just clicked in E4. That is a relative reference. And the macro recorder record it like that. Later, when we have variable size data sets, we're going to have to do relative reference. And that means if your cell is here and all of a sudden you click up here, the macro recorder did not say E2. It went 1, 2 above. And it will use the offset function. It will say go -2 rows. All right. For this video, don't worry about that. All you're going to do every time we click in a cell, it's going to be recording whatever that cell is. One last note. This button is about how you move your cursor around when the macro recorder is turned on. All right, since we're going to do an absolute macro with absolute references, we don't need to click this. And it doesn't matter what cell we're selecting. All right, you ready? I'm going to turn the macro recorder on. There's a button there. There's also a button down here. I'm going to click on this button right here, and it opens up the Record Macro dialog box. I'm going to name the macro Format Report. I'm going to give it a keyboard shortcut. Control's already there, so I'm going to hold Shift and R. I'm going to store this one in the Personal Macro Workbook. That means it'll work in any workbook on this computer. I'm going to put a description here. I usually am very detailed, but I'm not going to write a big description during the video. And then click OK. As soon as I click OK, it's going to start recording. All right, you could tell it's recording. It's got the stop button right there. It's also got over on the developer, the stop button is showing. All right, now we're going to click. And when I click in cell A1 to C1, because I want to format it, in the recorder it just says I'm selecting cell A1 to C1. I'm going to go over to Home, select some formatting. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Control *, and the macro recorder does know that that is select current region. I'm going to add a border. Now I'm going to add some formatting. I'm going to click in this cell and Control Shift down arrow. And I'm going to Control 1 and format as a full date. So the data that we always get comes in, and it shows only the month, but we want to show the year. So we're adding formatting. I'm going to click there. I clicked there. That said click in B2 in the macro recorder. Control Shift down arrow, Control 1. And I'm going to record this kind of number format. Click OK. Now I'm going to click in this cell. And in the macro recorder, it says click in cell D1. And I'm going to type Celsius, Control Enter, add some formatting. I'm going to click in cell D2. And I'm going to add a formula. We are going to use the convert function. Convert function is great. It'll convert all sorts from one unit to another. And if you look in help, it tells you all the different notations. We're going to click on this number, comma, from unit. In 2010, they have a huge drop down. You used to have to look it up. And I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do in double quotes big F for Fahrenheit. That's the from to big C, Celsius. Control Enter. Now I'm going to do some formatting. Control 1. Now I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to copy it all the way down. Now, because this is a absolute macro, when I copy this, it's copying it into each one of those cells, just like that. Now, I want to, at the bottom, add an average function. So I'm going to click right here. And again, in the macro, it clicked in C23. I'm going to type AVE, tab. And here I'm going to type average. And I'm going to select this range right here. Close parentheses. Control Enter. I'm going to highlight these two cells, add some border. Click right here and add some formatting. Now I'm going to Control Home. And I'm going to click in E1. And that's the end of our macro. So back on the developer, you can either click Stop or down here. I'm going to click Stop. Now I made the point of emphasizing what the macro recorder was recording as we clicked in the cell. And that'll become important because in our next couple examples, we're going to have to use relative, and then we're going to have to switch back and forth between relative and absolute. But absolute, because we never click this, every click we did clicked in an actual cell and got recorded that way. Let's go try it. I'm going to click on M1.1. Click in any cell. And what's our keyboard shortcut? Now, what if you can't remember? Or what if your macro doesn't work and you need to edit it? Well, you can go to List of Macros or Alt F8. And those keyboard shortcuts are Alt F8, means you have to hold it, Alt and then F8. Now, it says it's in the personal. If we try to click Edit here, it's not going to let us. And the reason why is, unbeknownst to most people, it's a hidden workbook. So we have to go unhide it. And it's hidden, which means it's always open. Every time you open Excel, that workbook is open. It's just hidden. That's how come you can use this macro in any workbook on this computer. All right, I'm going to click Cancel. We have to go to View. And sure enough, there's a hide and unhide. Unhide. And there it is. I'm going to unhide it. Now I'm going to go Alt F11. Oh, I'm sorry. Alt F8. And there it is. We could see it just shows Format Report. That's the name of the macro. You can run it this way, but I'm going to click Edit. This is just another way to get to the VBA window. Notice down here, this is our personal workbook, and a module 2 got recorded. And look at this. And there it is. You could see range A1 to C1 dot select. And you can look through this. There's some formatting. And down here, there's our number formatting. There's some more formatting. There's the word Celsius. Let's see what else. Pattern. So in our form, where's our formula? A lot of code here. Oh, there's our formula. Now, if you don't know, in VBA, they use the cell references R and C. And it just means R1 the formula here. This is the actual formula. And it means the same row, but minus one column. So that's a relative cell reference. So instead of one cell to the left, it says I'm in the same row always, but I'm always going to go minus one column. All right. Same with our average function down here. Row minus 21, so it starts minus 21 above in this column, and row minus 2 above in this column. All right, so formulas are much different than how the actual recorder records how you selected cells. So that's how you select. This is how they get recorded. And that just is always the case with cell references and formulas. And we're going to see a trick for formulas in 2 videos ahead, because we're going to have to do relative and absolute in one formula. All right, let's close this. You can close this up here. We're going to hide the workbook again. Okay, so now it's hidden, and we're back to our workbook. Now let's try it. What was our keyboard shortcut? It was Control-Shift-R. And just like that. So here's our monthly report. We get this data. Now it's perfectly formatted. There's our formula. Notice it's the cell references that we know and love, right? One cell to my left. And there's the average function. Wow. All right. That was absolute. Let's go do a relative. Now, here's a great example for relative. We have a bunch of data that was sent to us. Instead of copying and transposing and doing each one of these records, we can turn the macro recorder on, and very carefully copy, paste, transpose, delete these rows, and then click in the correct cell and turn off the macro. And then we can use a keyboard shortcut, and it will automatically fix this data set. Now, for this macro, we're going to run relative. And it's very important that your cursor starts in the right place and that you leave it in the right place. All right? I'm going to start here. Now, if I start here, when I stop the macro, it better be sitting in the next record's first cell. All right? So I'm going to click there. And now I'm going to turn this on. Everything we do, everything we click, every time we click, it will be recording a relative cell reference. So it will not be using that range function with range A1 to C1. It will be using offset function. It's going to say, like, from the active cell, please offset a certain number of rows or columns. All right, I'm going to turn this on, record macro. I'm going to call this fix data. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-T. I am not going to record it in my personal macro workbook. I'm going to record it in this workbook. And again, I would put a very detailed message here, but I'm just going to say fix data. Click OK. All right, there's the active cell. I'm going to Control-Shift-Down arrow, copy. And now when I click up here, it's recording one cell above. I'm going to go to Paste Special Transpose. Transpose. I'm going to, that's the row highlighted. Now I'm going to go down one row all the way to down however many rows that is. That's all relative. I'm going to leave one extra space, because that space, that row, is where the next record is going to be placed. Right-click, delete. I'm very carefully going to click. Now it's got this row. I'm going to go down one row, and I'm going to click right there. And now I'm going to stop my macro. That was all done with relative cell references, so I'm going to stop. And now I'm going to go look at the code and then run the macro. Actually, we're going to run the macro one time just to see how cool it is. It's Control-Shift-T. Control-Shift-T. Look at that. I did that twice. Control-Shift-T. Is that totally cool? Let's go see the code. I'm going to do Alt-F8. That's the list of macros. Notice we have two, one in our personal, one here. I'm going to click on that and click Edit. Now let's take a look at this totally cool code. The first thing was the range selection. dot, and then comma selection dot end down dot select. That was our Control Shift down arrow. Copy, and then look at this, active cell dot offset, -1 row up. Don't change any columns. That stuff is not relevant for us. It's this part that did the relative movement. Then look at this, paste special transpose. Finally, we transposed it, and then we went down, relative, active cell dot offset, and we added 1 row because we had to go down. Finally, the last one after we deleted, there's the delete. This is copying the whole rows. This is deleting. And finally, we had to add 1 row, which would go down 1 and over 1 column. And that's where we left off. Totally amazing. I'm going to close this. By the way, if you forget the keyboard shortcut, which I do a lot, Alt F8, and then you go to Options, and it tells you your keyboard shortcut. So now I'm just going to hold Control Shift T. Control Shift T. And then I got to the last one. I'm not going to debug. I'm going to say end. Isn't that totally cool? Escape right there. All right, we have one more macro. This was all relative. The one before was all absolute. I have all these sheets here for you to practice if you want. I'm going over to this one. Now, this one, we're going to mix it up. We're going to have some parts of it relative and parts of it absolute. And here's the reason why. We have 31 rows here, but our next report maybe will be 32 or 94. And so we're going to have to mix it up. And really, this is a way of tricking the macro recorder. Usually, people switch over and write code to determine how many rows there are. And actually, if you want to really learn code, read Mr. Excel's VBA and macro book. And he has some great code for that. But you could trick the macro recorder into writing code that'll pick up a data set that has varying lengths. All right, this is the same thing. The only difference is we have a different number of rows each time. So I'm going to go up to the developer ribbon and click on it. And I want to, whoops, I actually double clicked, right click, unminimize. There's a keyboard shortcut for that too. I think it's Control. I can't do it because it'll turn my recorder off. So we have the developer. I want to make sure this was on. I think I want to make sure that it's off. We're going to start it as an absolute, but in the middle of it, we're going to switch to relative. All right, let's go ahead. We're going to format this, add that column, and add an average down at the bottom. I'm going to click record. I'm going to call this format report 2. Again, I would give that a, no, I'm going to call that varying rows. Control Shift. I'm holding the controls there, so I hold Shift and Y. I'm going to save it in this workbook. If you wanted to, you could save it in your personal, so it's available everywhere. And then just something short. I usually put a lot of stuff there. All right, I'm going to click OK. All right, we're going to start out absolute. Add some formatting. I'm going to go to the Home ribbon. Control asterisk will actually trick the macro too. Control asterisk is the keyboard for current region. So it will highlight the entire, just like a pivot table does. It doesn't know. It just goes out until it finds all blank columns and rows around it. So we did that. Now we're going to click here and type Celsius. This is all absolute. I'm going to absolutely click there and create a formula. We'll do our same convert formula just like we did earlier. The number, click right there, comma, and we're going to put Fahrenheit, so from Fahrenheit to Celsius. Remember, we saw the code earlier. That's being recorded as a relative cell reference. Control Enter. And now I'm going to copy this. And now this is where we need to trick it. Last macro, we dragged it down, but we don't want to do that. We're going to have to click in cell C1. That's an absolute cell reference that we selected. Control down arrow says go down to the current region. And now we need to turn this on because we need to move one over from wherever the active cell is. So I'm going to turn the relative reference on. Arrow, that's recorded as a relative cell reference. And now I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-Up arrow, which says go to the next cell that has something. And I'm going to Control-V. And there we have tricked it. With our keyboard shortcuts and switching back and forth to paste that formula into a variable range. Now, we need to go back up because I need to get down here as from a variable row. So I need to go back up and Control down arrow. So I'm going to unselect this. I'm going to do Control Home just to jump up there. That was a relative cell reference. But now I'm going to click in cell C1. Actually, Control Home always goes to A1, whether it's relative or absolute. But I just clicked in C1. Using that, I'm going to use Control-Shift-Down arrow to go down to the bottom of the current range. And now I'm going to click Relative Cell Reference. Now I can click here. That's offsetting, adding two rows. Average, tab, equals our formula average. And I'm going to select this whole range. Now, selecting this whole range like that would not work. Except for, watch this. If you put an absolute cell reference, F4 right there, in the code it gets recorded as D2 all the way to 2 cells above the active cell. Control-Enter. Now I'm still in relative, so I'm going to highlight these 2 cells and add some formatting. I'm going to click in this one right here, still relative cell reference, like that, some formatting. I'm going to Control-Home. And I'm going to turn the macro off. I'm going to turn it off right here. All right, so we mixed it up there. That was pretty exciting. Let's go try it. I'm going to click over here on M32. Click in this cell right here. And what was our keyboard shortcut? If you forget, you go up and it's Control-Shift-Y, I think. So Control-Shift-Y. And let's check it out. You've got to be kidding me. Look at that. It even got that. Let's go try it on the big set. Again, you guys are going to, I would copy these over. And so you can try it a lot of times or make up your own data set. Control-Shift-Y. Boop. We totally tricked it. Look at that. Variable to, oh, this one's huge. And it worked. All right. So that's just a little bit about recording macros. I remember when I first recorded them, not knowing any VBA, I just messed up a lot and kept deleting the macros and trying again. I could see we already messed up in this macro. I didn't format this. But we saw in the first one we formatted it properly. In this one we saw clearly that you can go back and forth between relative and absolute, and you can trick the macro. All right, so that's a little bit about recording macros. And that's our last video for the Slaying Excel Dragons book. All right, see you next video.